She didn't shout. She didn't name names. But when Karoline Leavitt leaned into that microphone and said, "You don't get to drape yourself in dignity and vanish when the country is bleeding," every heart in the room knew exactly who she meant: Melania Trump. The silence that followed wasn't peace. It was a pressure bomb, and it detonated across America before the broadcast even ended. What happened next would uncover a buried draft, a silenced voice, and a quiet First Lady forced to choose: stay invisible, or finally speak. Stay with us, because what began as a televised confrontation will unravel into a buried truth that could change everything we thought we knew. It wasn't supposed to be anything more than a symbolic panel, a PR move. A polished production aired on C-SPAN titled "Women in Power: Reflections from the Front Lines." 5 women, 5 chairs, 5 different stories meant to project unity, strength, and grace under pressure. It was the kind of political theater that usually passed through America's living rooms unnoticed: background noise for retirees, a flicker on a flat screen at a suburban diner, or something a sleepy veteran might stumble into after Sunday church. But on this particular afternoon, in a studio dressed up like a cathedral of decorum, all ivory chairs, warm light, and glass water pitchers that caught the sun just so, one sentence changed everything. Karoline Leavitt hadn't even been the first to speak. For the first 20 minutes, she sat poised at the end of the semicircle, legs crossed, chin high, a silver cross glinting at her neck. She listened. She nodded. She played the game. The conversation circled around the usual buzzwords: representation, resilience, responsibility. The moderator, a polished anchor with practiced warmth, asked, "What does real leadership look like for women married to power? Do first ladies carry a duty beyond the photo ops?" That was the moment. Karoline leaned forward slowly, deliberately. Her hands folded on her lap, her voice calm, smooth, but her words were anything but safe. "You don't get to drape yourself in dignity and vanish when the country is bleeding." The sentence hung in the air like a church bell in the middle of a funeral. Nobody moved. You could almost hear the studio air vents click on. The camera operator flinched. One panelist inhaled a sharp breath and held it. The moderator blinked twice, searching her cue cards like they might offer an escape route. Karoline didn't blink. She didn't stammer. She looked directly into the lens, not at the other women, not at the host, at the American people. You don't get to sip tea in a designer dress while mothers are being deported. You don't get to smile for the Christmas card while children are screaming in cages. You don't get to stand beside the most powerful man in the world and then disappear when the questions get hard. That's not leadership. That's cowardice dressed up in couture. She never said the name, but she didn't have to. Everyone knew. Everyone. Melania Trump. The woman who had become a living symbol of polished detachment. The First Lady who stood beside cages of crying children in a jacket that read, "I really don't care, do you?" The woman who had once built a campaign around anti-bullying while her husband mocked women, veterans, immigrants. The woman who smiled with solemn eyes and said little while the country burned beneath her feet. Karoline's words didn't raise the volume in the room. They did something worse. They made it go completely, unbearably still. A kind of stillness that doesn't come from peace, but from impact. The producer behind the curtain mouthed something frantic to the tech booth. A delay was triggered. C-SPAN went to black for 3 seconds, then 4, then 8. When the picture returned, the host had moved to another question, and Karoline sat quietly again, as if nothing had happened. But across America, the echo of her words was already cracking through living rooms. At a retirement home in Tallahassee, a Korean war vet with Parkinson's sat up straighter in his wheelchair. He turned up the volume. At a kitchen in Toledo, a 74-year-old widow wiped her hands on her apron and rewound the clip on YouTube, whispering to herself, "Did she really just say that?" On Facebook, the clip was already trending. Karoline Leavitt slams Melania Trump without saying her name. Cowardice dressed in couture trends #1 on X. She said what America's been thinking. Within an hour, it hit 4.2 million views. The line wasn't just political. It was moral. It was emotional. It was generational. For millions of older Americans who had once watched Jackie Kennedy walk beside her husband's casket or Nancy Reagan whisper advice behind her husband's shoulder, the idea of the First Lady meant something sacred. Not perfect, but present. And now it meant what? A green jacket and silence? The betrayal cut deeper for those who remembered a different kind of strength, the kind passed down through mothers who worked 2 jobs, never missed a church service, and prayed before every meal, the kind that didn't get to vanish when life got hard. For them, Karoline hadn't just made a statement. She lit a fuse. Back in the studio, another panelist tried to recover the mood, bringing up bipartisan cooperation. But the words fell flat. The room had changed. Karoline knew it. She sat back, eyes steady, hands still folded, but her heart thudded with clarity. Not regret. Clarity. She hadn't gone there to start a fire, but maybe it was time something finally burned. Because silence, the kind that lets children suffer while cameras roll, the kind that wraps itself in pearls and pretends neutrality, was no longer noble. It was complicity, and for the first time, someone had said it. Out loud. On live TV. To millions. And somewhere far from that studio, in a house filled with glass and guarded gates, Melania Trump watched. And her silence, so often her armor, began to crack. The first crack wasn't a scream. It wasn't a thrown wine glass or a slammed door. It was the simple sound of a teacup rattling against its saucer, trembling in the hands of a woman who had long mastered the art of being unreadable. Melania Trump sat alone in a sunlit room of Mar-a-Lago, surrounded by gold trim and silence. The television played on mute, but the closed captions spoke volumes. Karoline Leavitt, that name? The name that used to flutter briefly across political blogs. The upstart. The Gen Z spokeswoman. A firebrand, yes, but one the Trumps had always considered more of a sparkler than a flame. Not anymore. Melania watched as the screen replayed the panel moment again, and again. Her own image didn't appear, not once, but her presence. It hovered in every pause. The way Karoline had stared down the lens, unflinching, deliberate, felt like a challenge hurled straight through the glass, like a letter nailed to the door of history. She never said my name, Melania whispered aloud to no one, but her voice cracked. And yet, the weight of knowing you've been judged without trial is one thing, but being seen without speaking, that was something else entirely. She reached for her phone. 11 missed calls. 3 from conservative anchors. 2 from Ivanka. 1 from a donor in Palm Beach, who left a voicemail so long it had to be split into 2 recordings. And 1 from her mother in Slovenian. What happened? Are you safe? She was, technically. But the walls around her, the carefully curated brand, the elegant silence, the stoic non-involvement, those weren't safe anymore. They were shaking. She walked slowly to the mirror above the fireplace. Her reflection stared back, sculpted, composed, untouched. But in her eyes, something flickered. Not fear. Recognition. Because Karoline's words hadn't just struck a nerve, they had peeled back a truth Melania had buried so deep even she had forgotten it. She had once written a speech, during the height of the family separation crisis, a real one, not the garden tours or the holiday traditions, not the pre-approved fluff. A speech that said what she actually felt, that separating children from their parents was evil, that silence was not grace. And it had been blocked by them. The handlers, the consultants, the West Wing shadow puppets who reminded her over and over that her job was not to challenge, but to decorate. She had folded. She had let the draft be deleted. She had chosen quiet. And now, Karoline Leavitt, a woman half her age, with half her privilege but double the fire, was holding that silence up to the light like a cracked piece of glass. Melania turned away from the mirror, and for the first time in years, she whispered 3 words she never thought she'd need to say. Maybe I failed. While the internet roared and the political talk shows dissected every pause in Karoline's sentence, a man in a cluttered office in Washington, D.C. blinked at his screen and froze. His name was Thomas Hale, 61 years old, a former White House archivist turned freelance fact-checker for political journalists who didn't have time to dig through years of policy dust. His knees weren't what they used to be, and the world moved too fast now, but he knew one thing better than anyone. Truth doesn't vanish. It gets buried. And on this humid Tuesday afternoon, while reruns of Karoline's firebrand moment played on every screen in America, Thomas was following a footnote. a tiny digital echo buried in the metadata of a speech Melania Trump had never given. He hadn't gone looking for it, not exactly. He had been hired by a young producer working on a podcast about first ladies in power. The assignment was simple: verify what speeches had been drafted versus delivered. A timeline. Boring work. Safe work. Until he found the folder. LSWHC Draft June 20, 2018 V3. The title looked innocent, like 100 others, but Thomas opened it anyway, because decades in government had taught him one truth: the most dangerous documents were the ones everyone forgot to delete. He scrolled slowly. The first paragraph was typical Melania. Grace, children, America's values. The kind of thing you could read with one eye closed. But then, it is not strength to separate a child from their parent. It is cruelty. It is cowardice. And it must stop. Thomas stopped breathing. He clicked to the next page. As a mother, I cannot look away. I will not pretend that silence is noble when suffering is being televised. His pulse quickened. His coffee sat untouched. His arthritis flared in his knuckles as he tapped back to the metadata. Last modified, June 20th, 2018. A name was attached: Helena Zavro, one of Melania's speechwriters. But there was another entry, a note, scrawled in digital margin markup. Do not send. POTUS will not allow. That was it. 4 words that killed a voice. He leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. This wasn't an abandoned speech. It was a silenced one. And it meant everything Karoline Leavitt had said on that stage wasn't just opinion. It was a trigger, a reckoning, an earthquake that had hit precisely where the foundation was already cracked. Thomas downloaded the file, twice, saved it to a flash drive he wore around his neck, then printed it, just like the old days, where the weight of paper somehow made a truth feel heavier. He didn't call a newsroom. He called a friend, Claire Jennings, editor of a quiet but respected publication that still believed in long-form investigative journalism. A widow, 67, with silver hair, sharp eyes, and a voice that could still command a room full of senators if she had to. When she answered, he read the speech aloud. When he finished, she said only 4 words. I'm coming over now. By sunset, they sat across from each other in Thomas's kitchen, surrounded by manila folders, scribbled notes, and 2 cups of stale decaf. This changes everything, Claire whispered, reading the final lines again. She wasn't silent because she didn't care, Thomas said. She was silenced. Claire leaned back. Then this is the moment. This is how you unbury a ghost. What do you call it? He asked. She tapped the edge of the printout. The speech that wasn't. The next morning, the story broke. Not on a flashy cable network, not on a partisan blog, but in the Sunday print edition of the Republic Standard, a paper older than Twitter, older than television. Headline: Melania Trump tried to speak and was silenced. We found the proof. The article was long, deliberate, free of spin. It printed the entire speech, and for the first time, Americans read what she had once tried to say. In homes from Missouri to Maine, elderly readers with bifocals and coffee cups sat at breakfast tables and gasped. She wrote this? One woman whispered in a Boston nursing home, her hand shaking. In Dallas, a retired pastor folded the paper and looked out his window. Lord forgive us, he muttered. We believed the silence was hers. Online, the backlash hit immediately, but it wasn't aimed at Karoline anymore. It was aimed at the system that gagged the First Lady of the United States. Dijorfi, Free Her Voice trended. Fox News called it the betrayal behind the pearls. MSNBC called it the reckoning of American femininity. But for everyday people, it felt like a truth finally confessed in a family that had kept too many secrets. Karoline Leavitt saw the headline that morning as she walked out of her townhome in New Hampshire. She paused. She read. And for the first time since the panel, she didn't feel the rush of adrenaline or the thrill of exposure. She felt something else. Responsibility. Because it turned out her words had broken something, but also revealed something buried underneath. Not just cowardice, but courage that never got to breathe. And now, the whole country was watching, waiting, not for a fight, but for a reckoning. The kind that doesn't shout. It listens, and then speaks, together. It wasn't a press release. It wasn't a tweet. It wasn't even a carefully crafted Instagram caption, signed with soft lighting and a branded message. It was a phone call. Karoline Leavitt was standing barefoot in her kitchen, hair still damp from a morning shower, when her phone rang. The screen showed an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something in her gut said, "Pick it up." She pressed the green circle. "Hello?" A pause, then a voice. Soft, precise, with that unmistakable European accent. "This is Melania Trump." Karoline went still, completely still, one hand still hovering over the coffee pot. "I read the article," Melania said. Silence hung between them like a rope made of barbed wire, not tense, not angry, just sharp. "You've caused quite a storm," Melania continued. "I didn't expect—" Karoline started. Melania interrupted gently. "Neither did I, but it is time we speak plainly." Karoline stepped into the living room and sat down slowly. Her heart beat loud in her ears. "I want to say something," Melania said, "and I don't want it twisted by press or pundits." "Go ahead," Karoline replied, her voice steadying. "I was afraid," Melania said. "I was told I would embarrass the office. I was told to smile, to disappear, and I did." She paused, "but I never forgot what I wanted to say." Karoline closed her eyes, listening not as a commentator, not as a conservative voice, but as a woman. "And when you spoke on that stage," Melania continued, "you said the things I buried. You shook the ground I was told to stand still on." "I didn't mean to attack you," Karoline whispered. "I know," Melania replied. "You didn't. You revealed me." That line cracked something in Karoline's chest. She'd been trained to debate, to expose, but not to be caught in someone else's exposure. Melania's next words came softer. "My son read the article this morning," she said. "He asked me, 'Mom, is that true? Did you really write that?' And I told him yes. Yes, I did." The line went quiet. Then Melania asked something unexpected. "Can I meet you?" Karoline blinked. "In person?" "Yes," Melania said. "Not on camera. Not for press. Just for truth." Karoline didn't hesitate. "Yes," she said. They met 2 days later, not in a studio, not in the halls of Mar-a-Lago or a Senate office, but in the chapel of a historic women's college outside Philadelphia. The room was empty, quiet, lit only by the muted light of a stained glass window. A single wooden bench sat near the altar. Melania was already seated when Karoline entered. No security, no entourage, just two women who had both been praised and punished for the volume, or absence, of their voices. Karoline approached and sat beside her. For a long time, they didn't speak. Then Melania said, "I was raised to believe silence is elegance." Karoline nodded. "I was raised to believe silence is surrender." Two truths, sitting side by side. "What now?" Karoline asked. Melania looked at the stained glass image above them, a woman holding a lantern. "Now," she said, "we speak, carefully, but clearly, not to defend ourselves, but to defend the women watching." Karoline blinked back something close to tears. "Then let's speak," she said. And in that quiet chapel, with no press corps and no clickbait, they began to share stories. Real ones, not sanitized for approval. Stories of being misunderstood, of being diminished, of feeling like a decoration in a room built for battle. And for the first time, Karoline didn't feel like an attacker, and Melania didn't feel like a victim. They felt, finally, like women refusing to vanish. Outside the chapel, reporters waited. Rumors swirled. Speculations bloomed, but inside, no headlines were being written, only truth. And when they finally emerged, hours later, they didn't pose, they didn't wave, they simply walked out, side by side, one known for speaking too sharply, one known for not speaking at all, and together they said nothing, because sometimes silence is not avoidance. Sometimes it's a prelude to the loudest thing you'll ever say. It began with no cameras, no announcements. No statements from press secretaries or tweets begging for retweets. It began with one photo, blurry, unfiltered, taken by a janitor who happened to be polishing brass outside the chapel as Karoline and Melania stepped into the daylight. No smiles, no held hands, just two women side by side, eyes forward, backs straight. And yet that image cracked the surface of the American conversation like a hammer against glass. By sundown, it was everywhere. Cable news scrambled. Anchors breathlessly analyzed every pixel. "What does it mean?" they asked. But it wasn't what the women said. It was what they didn't say that screamed. In living rooms across the country, older viewers leaned in. Veterans, grandmothers, widowers, people who had lived through the Cold War and Watergate and 9/11. They'd heard speeches. They'd seen posturing. But they had rarely seen this. Two women walking away from the performance into something real. It turned something. By morning, Fox News and CNN were running simultaneous split-screen coverage. "Karoline and Melania, a silent truce," read the headline. But online, the response was louder, more raw. On Facebook, a Vietnam vet named Harold wrote, "For the first time in years, I believe someone is telling the truth." On YouTube, a woman named Marianwa72 uploaded a video of herself crying. That chapel reminded me of the one I married in. And I remember keeping my mouth shut for 40 years because I was told wives don't speak on politics. Well, I think I'm done being quiet. Her video went viral. What came next wasn't a press tour, it was a movement. Karoline returned to Capitol Hill, not as a flamethrower, but as a lantern. Not softer, but wiser. Her next speech, not about Melania, about what it means to be erased in the name of grace. She began, "We tell young girls to be strong, to be brave. But then we praise women who disappear when things get hard. And I'm here to say, no more. No more silence sold as dignity. No more elegance used to excuse absence." The room, half full of men twice her age, sat still. Some of them were crying. A few days later, Melania did something she hadn't done in years. She gave a speech, not in heels, not on a stage with golden trim, but in a community center in Cleveland, Ohio. She stood in front of a folding table and said, with her voice just above a whisper, "They told me silence was survival, but it didn't save me. It suffocated me." The audience rose, not clapping, rising. From kitchen tables to church pews, older Americans, especially women, began sharing stories of when they'd been told to hush. Stories they had locked away. Now, they poured out. Church newsletters featured the phrase, "Silence is not strength. Silence is surrender." Tashent, quilting groups stitched it into their blankets. Daughters called their mothers and asked, "Why didn't you ever speak up?" And some mothers finally told the truth. It wasn't politics, it was humanity. Months later, at a televised panel on women in leadership, Karoline and Melania appeared again, this time together, officially. A journalist asked, "Do you two consider yourselves allies?" Karoline smiled but didn't answer. Melania did. "No," she said calmly, "we are not allies. We are mirrors, and America finally saw its reflection." The audience gasped, and then they clapped. Because it was true. This wasn't about party lines. This wasn't about titles. This was about a generation of women, especially those who had carried their families, their churches, their communities in silence, finally being told, your voice matters, not because it's loud, but because it's true. And as that final moment faded to black, the screen read only one sentence. History isn't written by those who speak first. It's written by those who speak last. And that time, it was two women who refused to be silent any longer.